Okay, so let me introduce our guests. Okay, as you saw in the program, I mean, our European representative is Deli Saavedra. Deli is from Catalonia. He has worked in translocations for 3 decades. So he's seen how things were in the 90s and how things are going on now, which there's a big difference. And I wanted to invite Deli because for 2 reasons, I think. One, because he has a broad geographical perspective of Europe. I mean, he has worked in the Iberian Peninsula, but he's working a lot in Eastern Europe. So and also his colleagues of Rewilding Europe, they work in other countries. So he has a European vision. I think that was very important. I think the second reason is because Rewilding Europe is becoming one of the new, exciting organizations in conservation, especially in Europe. And I think it's good to see the organizational perspective. I also wanted to invite Astrid. One thing that we did, and this was the trick, is we had the maestros that are officially in the program, but depending on who was in the audience, it's like, okay, do you want to come for this session to bring something else? I wanted to invite Astrid Vargas. Anybody in Spain probably will know her. Astrid, the reason why I invited her is because she was critical in the Iberian Links recovery process. She was the leader of the phase when we started captive breeding, and she played a very critical role. But she's been outside of the game for a while. And I think that kind of outside perspective was good, because I don't know how many of the Iberian Links people who were registered are already here, but at least there are like 10 people. So we could have our own symposium on Iberian Links. So the problem is who to choose within those 10 people. So, why did he choose me and not the other? Because they are all at the same level and different organizations. So the trick was to invite Astrid, who's an outsider, but an insider, and he has perspective. And also, as you will see, because he brings an American perspective. She worked with the black-footed ferret before, so she can compare how things work in Spain, Europe, and how things work in the United States, or worked. So that's the reason to invite Astrid. First, Deli will talk, then Astrid. And our plan was to have Roy Dennis from Scotland. He started working with translocations in the 60s, so he has the widest chronological perspective. Now that role will be for Carl Jones for sure, who will be ending with him. But he couldn't come. He called me yesterday in the morning. My wife has COVID. I don't think it would be sensible to go. Okay, so we lost Roy. So we have Deli, we have Astrid, and we're going to start with a video that Deli sent us. Okay, Deli, so let's start. You started working with translocations in the 90s. So you have the clicker there, and so we can start like how things were and what happened when you were working, and then we can move forward to other things, to the future. Or the present.
Yeah, what I'm trying to think is to speak in the very general terms. I'm going to use my experience to explain about things that have been happening in Europe in the last 3 decades. That's a long time. And so in the 90s, when I started my career, I started in a kind of a small Albufera, Valencia. It's a small national park that is called Aiguamolls in Girona province in the northeast Spain. And at that moment, until now, I think in many of the protected areas, the idea was we protect the area and we have to keep it like we found it. But of course, many of those areas, we found them empty of wildlife. So I think in the 90s, when we started to have this idea, in many places, in many of those new natural parks that the regional governments, the comunidades autónomas, they were creating, this idea we have to bring back a species. But in that moment, I think the idea to bring back a species was really about, we were thinking about emblematic species, like flagship species. So we started to reintroduce, for example, the white stork or the fallow deer. I think also in that moment, something that in Spain was much easier to reintroduce a species. I don't know if it's because the regional governments are really young, maybe there was less legislation and less bureaucracy, but the fact is that we were very successful into just to speak with other regions and to translocate white storks or fallow deer from different regions. And purple guyunul we also reintroduced in the park. And I think that was really interesting. But I think we were never really thinking on the ecological processes and keystone species. That came after, much after. And one of, probably the one we did, the most difficult one, and I think also the most emblematic one, was the reintroduction of the otter. And that, of course, was difficult because there were no otters in captivity, so we had just to translocate them. We have to capture them in other places of Western Iberian Peninsula, where there were still populations, like in Extremadura, in Asturias, from Portugal. But we need to be there for months to catch the animals, to transport to the Barcelona Zoo. And then after health checking and after putting some transmitters, then we were releasing them in the national park, in this natural park of Aiguamolls, and also in the basins of two rivers. And then, of course, we were doing this radio tracking. Maybe some young people here, you don't even know what is this guy doing with an antenna. That was in the old times. Now everyone is looking at the screen of a computer. So, and of course, as you all know here, the release time is a fantastic time to do to get other objectives on your reintroductions. So, and of course, it's not only about reintroduced animals. We release 42 animals, and now there are hundreds of otters in all this area of Catalonia. They colonize southern France, so 2 or 3 basins of southern France, they have otters. And of course, and we will probably mention later, that the otter at that moment start to recover. So you could also say, but we will come back to this later, that maybe just waiting for 30 years, the otter probably had come back to those places. But as you know, reintroductions is not only about released animals. There are a lot of things going on behind. We use it for education, we use it for awareness, we use it to work with local communities. And in that moment, that reintroduction was used by the Catalan government as a kind of cherry on the cake of the big efforts that they were doing to put these water treatment plants all around the rivers. In that moment, in the 90s, the rivers of Spain, they were completely dirty and full of pollution. And all this effort to put these water treatment plants, the idea is that, well, thanks to the rivers are now cleaner, and we have the opportunity to bring the otter. So all these reintroductions, they have always this kind of different efforts.
Before you move to the present and kind of the next level, I think, because we started quite fast, I think it would be good for the people that are not from Europe to provide some context of how it is working in Europe with translocations, especially things that you were talking, that you implied that it was easier before than now, changes in bureaucracy, European Union. I mean, how it is to work in translocations in Europe compared to other continents.
Yeah, that's true. Let's provide a bit of background because, this is for many of the audience is very normal, but now I'm realizing that for some people it's like, what? So yeah, of course. Well, Europe is a tiny continent compared with Africa, for example, but we are like, I think it's 48 countries, and the European Union 27. So of course, there are very good things of this, especially, for example, in the European Union, I think, and we published 10 years ago a report that is called Wildlife Comeback in Europe. And the keys for success of the wildlife comeback, it is also happening in Europe, not only because of reintroduction, it's also protection. And European Union brought us legislation very early, especially habitat directives and bird directives. So they provide legislation that says that you had to protect a species, you have to protect habitats, and they have also to be restored. So that was something that I think is really interesting and probably you don't have in other continents. So this idea that you have like a superior administration above the national government that is providing guidelines and is forcing countries especially the southern countries that were more lazy into these kind of things, they, let's say, forced to create natural areas to protect species and to protect areas. And that became the Natura 2000 network. Natura 2000 network is the biggest network, probably is the biggest network in the world of protected areas. 18% of Europe is protected by all these thousands, probably, yeah, I would say thousands of small and bigger natural areas. And I think that that was very interesting in the European context. Of course, probably the negative part of the layers that we have, the administration layers that we have in Europe. For example, here we are now in Valencia, so we're going to have a municipality, but we are going to have a provincial government. We have a regional government. We have the Spanish government, the national government, and we have a fifth layer, which is the European Union. And this creates, when you want to do things, especially innovative, and we are talking retroductions, is going to be always like an innovative thing to do, and trying to move borders, you usually get blocked by the European bureaucracy or the Spanish bureaucracy or the regional bureaucracy, and sometimes it's very difficult to move because all these layers. So I think in Europe, probably the characteristic is that we have this opportunity that started already in the 70s and the 80s to protect, but also things I think are becoming more and more difficult, and because we don't have time and we need to scale up, somehow we need to break these borders. So I speak with all your administrations and all your governments, because we really need to start to push things. So, well, then we jump into the 2000s, but this is the part that we are going to leave for Astrid later, because this is one of the greatest success in the European conservation. So if there were 94, I think, lynxes in 2000, and now there are, I think, 1,100 or 1,200 lynx, this is amazing. So this is 10 times more, 11 times more. This is amazing success, but Astrid is going to explain about this later after I finish. So I'm going to jump into another decade. And then in 2011, Rewilding Europe was founded. And of course, part of the work of Rewilding Europe is to rewild, but an important part of rewild is to restore species, is to reintroduce species. But then the perspective is different. And for me also was a kind of, it was interesting because it was a change of paradigm. It was no longer about threatened species. Some of them, they are threatened. But what is important in the rewilding efforts are the keystone species. So the ones that are really having an impact on the landscapes. Those ones that are the architects of the landscapes and really needed, because in Europe is quite an empty continent if you compare with a few hundreds or a few thousand years ago. And we have all these ecological processes that have been missing. Many of those, especially herbivory, we're going to see it, but they've been missing in the last decades, because, yeah, 1,000 years ago, well, not shot because there were no guns, but we killed all the big animals 1,000 years ago, but at least the Europeans, what we did is we just brought our animals, and that was the livestock. So some of those ecological processes, they continue for thousands of years until very recently in most of Europe like livestock. But now, in the last decades, we are also missing those. So for the first time, many habitats, many ecosystems in Europe, they don't have those ecological processes since 10,000 years ago. It's the first time that is happening. And of course, we see what are the problems in terms, for example, in the Mediterranean world with the big fires. This is just a consequence of this. We are losing those ecological processes. So in Rewilding Europe, what we try is to reintroduce these kind of ecological processes with different species reintroductions. One of the ones that we are doing, one of the animals that we are introducing is the bison. We are introducing bison in Romania, in the Carpathians, in Tarku Mountains. I think this is a fantastic example. So besides the links that Astrid is going to explain, bison is also being one of the successes of European conservation. 20 years ago, but that's very small, I don't know if you will see it, but those are the latest figures that appeared in a report a few weeks ago. 20 years ago in the wild, we had like not yet 2,000 animals in the wild of bison. Remember that 100 years ago, there were no bisons in the wild. There was a bunch of bisons in some zoos, And some heroes of that time, they brought those animals together and started to breed them already 100 years ago. And the effort still continues, but you see the difference. I mean, in 20 years, now we have 9,000 bison in total and almost 7,000 bison in the wild. And this is very good news. And many people still think the bison are completely endangered. No, they are not. But still, 7,000 animals for the whole continent is ridiculous. We need many more bisons everywhere, because the bison was living everywhere, was one of the large herbivores, the main common large herbivores in Europe. And we need them back. And Rewilding Europe, we are doing our small, let's say, drop of water in that territory, in Romania. We translocate animals from zoos, from wildlife parks, some of them from the wild, for example, from Poland. And we bring them to this area with an adaptation fence, so the animals are in a kind of enclosure of more than 100 hectares for a few months, and then we release them. And it's going very well. We have released almost 80 animals, and probably there in the wild 120 or 130 animals in the wild. It's amazing to see those animals in new habitats. So you see a group of bison in the forest, and in a mountain like this with a slope of 40 degrees, and they're just jumping like crazy. So it's amazing to see animals that were considered to live only beyond the forest, to see them in different habitats, because this is what is about recovering Europe. It's about to have all these animals in new habitats, which are not new, but now is the first moment in the history that we can have them back. Another one is the Kulan. For the Kulan, there's a super small video. I think it's...
¿Cómo se hace? ¿Tengo que tocar un...?
Sí, por aquí en medio está el link. Yeah, just click. Sí, clicas aquí. Because one minute video is worth 1,000 words, so just look at the video. So this, in 1 minute, is explanation of this reintroduction that we are doing in the Danube Delta Basin, in a steppe area in Ukraine. And yeah, and also use the opportunity to thank our Rewilding Ukraine team that is having a hard time now, doing this amazing job. We've been reintroducing kulan and marmots and susliks and horses in the Danube Delta, and you will see another video later, and eagle owls. So they are doing an amazing job, and this is the idea, to recover all the species that disappear on the steppe. And this is also is a sad story, because kulan, for example, was very abundant in the European habitats, and was everywhere. And now in Europe, we only have a few individuals in Ukraine, and we are trying to recover the species right from there in Ukraine. But I think the kulan is a species that we really like to have in all these arid ecosystems all across Europe. And I think Spain would be a fantastic place to have kulan again. It will live here a long time ago, and it could be the herbivore that we would like to have in those more arid areas or more dry areas. So we have started so far. At the same time, I think it's interesting, we are getting animals from another biosphere reserve in Ukraine. So it's a translocation of a few hundred kilometers. By the way, we'll see, because this biosphere reserve and the rest of the populations are now under the Russian occupation, so we don't know what's going to happen. But in any case, when I was working there, I heard that in some of these reserves, because they are small and they are having such a big success, they have more than 400 kulan in one peninsula in Ukraine, they were culling animals. So were they shooting animals because they have so many? And I think this is the other thing, this is the other lesson we need to learn in Europe. How is it possible that we are shooting endangered species like kulan or bison because there's no place? What does it mean there's no place? If I guess that tomorrow when we will listen about Africa, this is not happening in Africa. Come on, in Africa, you just trade them. You just trade the animals that you bring to another place. How is it possible that this is happening in Europe? So again, I think this is another lesson learned. We need to be much more agile and much better into get animals from one place to the other and recover populations everywhere. And another one, there's another short video that I think you maybe, if it's there, it's going to be worth to see.
¿Lo pongo?
Sí, ponlo. So this is another example, but this is an exception, because those horses, coney horses, they are being released on islands and in the outer delta of the Ukrainian Danube Delta, and there's an agreement with the Danube Biosphere Reserve that those animals are given the status wild. So they are considered wild animals, they are going to stay there, they're going to be wild animals doing their thing, grazing, doing their ecological functions, and they are never going to be treated, marketed, or whatever. But this is an exception because in most of Europe, our large herbivores, and this is the difference with other continents, our large herbivores are considered a livestock. So when you want to release horses or cattle into a landscape, because this landscape needed, because there's been, for example, land abandonment, and there's no livestock anymore, so we don't have extensive grazing anymore, and we need to do something. We need to bring back these ecological processes. We have to do it legally as a livestock. And this has a lot of implications, because you release animals that need to be ear tagged, it need to be or cheap, the vets need to get samples every year. And of course, that's very difficult to make compatible with rewilding or with reintroductions of wild animals, because you have to manage them all the time. You want them wild, you want to show to the public that we have back wild animals in Europe, but every year a vet needs to take a blood sample. And it's a real difficult thing in Europe. So, and in that place, for example, in Ukraine, we managed to have this exception, because you could think, if those animals are going to be always there, we are not going to trade them. We are not going to hunt them, or we are not going to take them for meat. What is the point to have all these regulations? So we need, and it's happening in some countries. In the Netherlands, for example, some of these rewilding projects have breeds of cattle or conic horses, and they have kind of exceptions. And this is what we need. And I think it's a bit like the legislation on vultures in Europe, where there's a directive that allows the states to create these free carcass deposition areas where if an animal dies, it can just stay there, because we know that there's not going to be problems, and the vultures, we eat them in half an hour. So I think we need, in Europe, we need also these kind of exemption areas where you can have what we consider cattle, or what we consider horses, as a wild animal. Because in Europe, the main herbivores in Europe, if we don't go that far back, when we have elephants, mammoths, and rhinos, but if we don't count those, the main large herbivores that were shaping our landscapes were the bison, the aurochs, and the horse, and on the wetlands, the water buffalo. And we need them back. As I said before, we had them back for many centuries because we had livestock, but now in many places of Europe, they are no longer there, so we need to reintroduce them. And this is a challenge for rewilding in Europe, for example, for the reason I'm putting it here, because I think this is also a nice point of discussion. How are we going to do that? I remember that this group of horses that went into Danube Delta, they're coming from Latvia. We have other herds with other partners, and it took 3 months of paperwork and preparations to transport those animals from Latvia to Danube Delta in Ukraine. The same day, probably, or today, there are probably tens of thousands of livestock, animals, pigs and rabbits and cattle. They are being transported, while I'm speaking, throughout Europe without any problem. So sometimes I think we are still, in the conservation world, we are still managing the scarcity. Let's start to manage the abundance. So let's get on and try to work much harder to have this in a bigger number. And as I said, the same for other species. We are working with something that we call tauros, which is a kind of, we have been breeding primitive breeds of cattle, but not to have more meat or to have more meat or more milk, but to have an animal that is a sturdy animal, can live in the wild, can defend from wolves and other predators, and this is what we call tauros, and we are releasing tauros in some areas, but as I said, we are releasing them. People say, oh, that's fantastic, it's super wild, but still they have ear tags, because the vets, they are obliging us to have ear tags. And the same with water buffalo.
Yeah. One question?
Yes, let's go back. Yeah, one question.
Okay. Some of the people here come from the zoo world. One of the things is how important were zoos in these projects, like to get coolants or other animals, and how that can they help in the future. I think it's something that should be said. I mean, I don't know if you are getting animals from zoos or they are relevant or not in Europe, in your case.
You mean the sources in general?
Yeah, as sources of animal.
No, the sources of animal is one of the problems is to source animals. But as I said, at the same time that we have some trouble to source animals, in some places we are culling animals because there are so many. And I know already, because I'm in this world, you are speaking with everyone, and I know already about Kulan in Ukraine, bison in Poland, Przevalsky horses in Hungary. So the animals are there, but we need to be much more agile, and we need to We need to push forward all these boundaries to be able to reintroduce those animals. And it's true that for some species we have some problems with the sources.
I wanted to ask about zoos, zoológicos. Es que
zoos,
sí.
sorry.
No zapatos, tampoco.
Not these ones.
Sí.
These are called wild shoes.
El papel de los... ¿Os pasan animales los zoológicos?
No. We work a lot with zoos.
¿Sirven para algo?
No, we work a lot with zoos. But for example, with the bison, we work with zoos. Of course, you have to choose between a wild animal and a zoo animal. Sometimes it's better to work with a wild animal, but the role of the zoos, I think, is relevant, but at the same time, and this is of course my personal opinion, we also need to be much more creative and fast in the relation between the zoos and the captive breeding and the reintroductions. Because sometimes, for example, those programs for endangered species, the EEP programs from EASA, all these programs to breed and species are very close, very difficult. So when you're asking animals, yeah, okay, but we have to look at the pedigree because of the genetic diversity, sometimes it's very difficult. And I said before, we don't have time. We have to be more agile. Sorry, I'm repeating all the time the same, but this is my feeling.
One question is, I mean, looking from outside, this kind of European tradition that is fledgling now, that is starting now. I mean, looking from North America or from Africa, it looks like these Europeans, they have this obsession with domestic animals. Like you love domestic animals. And because they are easy and they are not, they don't threaten people or whatever. And at the same time, the North Americans typically say, no, rewilding culture of Europe, they are obsessed with domestic animals. They don't work with large carnivores because they are afraid of them. So why this obsession with domestic animals? And I think you said it clearly, because it's about an ecological role. This is not about saving a species, so I think that's important to say. And why you don't talk about large carnivores in the context of Europe? Because the Africans do it, the Indian people are going to talk about that. Here is like, why is the context? What's going on there?
Well, there are two things. One is because carnivores in many regions are coming back. Okay. So you have wolves coming back, bears coming back, and the other thing is about conflict. So I think nowadays in Europe, I think it would be very difficult to start a wolf reintroduction project. It would be opposition from everywhere. So I think what we do is we manage the coexistence. So we try to manage the coexistence in the places where there are large carnivores. Of course, it's not the same to reintroduce lynx. There have been reintroductions of not only Iberian lynx, but also the Eurasian lynx without problems, let's say, or not a lot of problems. And there have been reintroductions of brown bears, but not wolves. So I think in the case of Rewilding in Europe, our policy or our strategy is we invest on the large herbivores because of the ecological role. Also because those are the prey, together with our reintroductions of deer and other species, are the prey for large carnivores. And then we work hard to manage the coexistence. So in Central Apennines, we work to try to have a coexistence with the populations of brown bear. In Romania, the same. For example, you reintroduce bison, but bison can make damages on the orchards of the neighbors. So I think it's important to work with the coexistence. We work with the large herbivores. We work with the scavengers because we're reintroduction vultures. And it's true that then you could ask, what are you doing with the carnivores? So with the carnivores, we're trying to keep a low profile while those carnivores are coming back.
Thank you. We are okay with time, just to tell you, the two of you, okay? We're okay with time, so we don't have to be stressed.
Super.
Then the next question is, you wrote a text some time ago about, this came from a conversation that we had some years ago, about recurrent arguments against reintroductions, things that people keep saying to oppose reintroductions or translocations, that in a very kind of funny or magic way, they get repeated in different contexts, different countries, and through time. I mean, you can hear the same in the 90s than in 2020. So I would like to see your experience on that, and which are the typical arguments that you hear to say, no, this shouldn't be done.
Yeah, well, in general, I don't like much to to speak about things against or things negative. I'm a very positive guy, so I don't like to really speak about this. But it's true that, and I wrote this chapter for Ignacio's book, that is a recurrent argument. So when you try to start introductions, you always got the same arguments why it's better not to do these reintroductions. Of course, in general, when I get, let's say, arguments or reasons why not to do things, I always try to ask, yeah, but give me the reasons why to do things. But in any case, let's explore a little bit those arguments against reintroductions, because they're always the same. I mean, from the 90s to today, I'm always listening to the same arguments. And one is the typical one you probably have heard always. No, the species was never here. Okay, yeah, the species was never here. And you say, well, why it's never been here? No, because there's no data. And you don't have a scientific article, or you don't have a book from the 15th century, you don't have an engraving when we see the species. And I want to put a couple of examples. One, it was when we reintroduced the Cinereus vulture in the Pyrenees. There was a big conservation NGO in Spain that said, no, you can't do that because there are no data of Cinereus vultures in the Pyrenees. And it was true, it was very difficult. I think we found a French book from 1900, something like this, that they would say that it was a kind of very dark vulture or something like this. But there was almost no data. Of course, you can understand that these species disappeared because of poison and because they were shooting them in the 19th century. In the Pyrenees, in one of the remote areas of the Pyrenees, of course, there was no British naturalists there to write about it. So there was just no data. But if you look at the range of the Cinereus vulture that lives between Extremadura and Kazakhstan, I put the question in the other way. I said, well, can you prove that a species that is living from Extremadura to Kazakhstan was never living in the Pyrenees? Well, that's strange. So we did it anyway. And we got the permits from the Catalan government, we did it, and the reality is that now there are, I think it's more than 25 pairs in the Pyrenees. The species are doing very well. It's one of the first places, together with Sierra Nevada, where you have, back in Europe, the 4 vultures in the same place. So it's fantastic. There's an economy out of this with the hides, the vulture hides. And those animals are moving between the Iberian Peninsula and connecting with the animals that have been reintroduced in central France, in the Massif Central. So it was a success. And yeah, we didn't know if they were there or not, but it's simple logic. Let's not make things so complicated. And now it's happening again with the wild-tailed eagle reintroduction in the Cantabric. Yeah, you hear all these people, especially people with a lot of knowledge and coming from the conservation world or coming from the university, saying, no, this is not, let's not do that because that's really exotic, it's very strange that the species was never here. But again, it's the same. I mean, it's a big raptor flying hundreds of kilometers, living from Scandinavia to Croatia. I was looking at places last week, places in Croatia where they are breeding, and also it's been in the Mediterranean, it's been in the Atlantic. So it's not logical that this kind of a species and big eagle-eating fish wasn't living everywhere. And for me, it's funny, and maybe I'm wrong, but for me it's funny. I think that in Africa they never had these kind of questions. No, you know, this eagle was in Africa, but not in Zimbabwe. No, in Zimbabwe it was not there. I never heard this kind of discussions. It's really a European thing. So I think we need to think about it.
It's not only European. I mean, as the friends from Argentina will tell, yeah, the giant anteater and the peccaries were not there.
Okay.
I mean, there was some kind of mysterious gap in the distribution why they were not there. Yeah. So I think your point is that when you don't have enough data to back up that the animal was there, the species was there, is to look at the biogeography of the species.
Exactly.
And look, I mean, what would be the mysterious process why it wouldn't be there? Because if it can move and is a kind of similar ecosystem, why they wouldn't be there? It's about not looking for the specific reference, but understanding the ecology and the distribution of the species.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And also take into account that all our ecology and biology books on wildlife and the threatened species were written in the moment where our species, especially in Europe, they were in the lowest level. No? So the golden eagles only live in the highest mountains. The monk seals, they can only live inside the caves. Yeah, of course, we were shooting all of these animals all the time. So it was logical. They were just hidden somewhere. The bison only lives inside the deepest forest. Come on. The bison is a grazer, so it just wants to be in a nice grassland. So we have to be more creative, and as you are saying, I think we have to look at the biogeography of the species, not really to the data. So that is one recurrent one. That is also one very typical. There's another one that is also, it always happened, that is that, no, but you know, don't do anything because the species will come back. It's only a matter of time. So please don't do anything, and it will come. And as I said, there are always reasons not to do things. So, and that was the case with the otter, because in the moment in the 90s when we started the reintroduction of the otter, probably the otter was already in the lowest level and it was starting to recover. And in some regions of Europe, it was starting to recover. There was a population in the Pyrenees, West Pyrenees, maybe 150 or 200 kilometers more to the west. So there were people from the conservation world and even some authorities say, no, there's no need to do reintroductions because, you know, the otter will come, don't do anything. And again, we did it anyway. But we said, yeah, we're doing it because look at this picture. I mean, look at the face of these boys and these girls. It's amazing. I mean, the power of release a species, threatened species or not threatened species, but the power of these images and the release of wildlife, as you probably hear, or you all practitioners, you know, is super powerful. So it doesn't matter. I mean, this otter project cost 300,000 euros in that time, of course, in the 90s, no? So probably now it would be much, much more. But it was really worth, because we, even to restore a population that maybe now after 30 years probably they will maybe arrive from the Pyrenees, although it's difficult because it's a mountain area. The thing is that we managed to get a lot of conservation traction, people that were volunteer or were those small boys now working conservation. So there are all kinds of other benefits to do this kind of operation. So don't be shy. I mean, do things because they matter. They matter a lot. So this is a recurrent argument also. And then I have a third one, because in that chapter there were like 6, but I don't want to speak too much about the things against. No, it's only the third one. So the third one is the genetic one. So no. You want to do a reintroduction, and someone says, no. You have to take the closest populations possible. And you say, well, yeah, but maybe the closest population or is extinct, or there are so few individuals that we're going to harm this population. So I'm going to take the ones that are farther there. And then someone says, no, genetically this is not possible because we have done some analysis, genetic analysis, and they are different. They are completely different, or a bit different. And you say, well, okay, so I have 2 more examples. One is the ibex, the Iberian ibex, no? You know, the cabra montés. They were very rare. Well, they were common everywhere until the 19th century. Then they started to disappear because of hunting, mainly. And there was a moment in the beginning of the 20th century, there was a scientist that said that there were 4 different subspecies in the Iberian Peninsula, which later is not that clear. So there are authors that say that it was never like this, but in any case, there were 4 subspecies, 1 subspecies extinct already in the 19th century in Portugal. That one disappeared. The other two remain, and the third one, that is the interesting one, is the one that was living in the Pyrenees. So in the Pyrenees, there was Iberian ibex, in theory, a different subspecies, and it was living in the Pyrenees, but the numbers were continued decreasing. In the 50s and the 60s, there were a bunch of individuals. The Spanish government created protected areas for those ibex, but it was too late. They were living in the worst habitat possible because, of course, it's the habitat where they were not killed. So they were living up in the Pyrenees, in the north face, very cold place, so in the worst place. And they were less and less, 10, 5, 3, and nothing was done, or couldn't be done, because probably the population was already too small. And I remember you were always saying this in these cursos que hicimos. And the 6th of January of the year 2000, a tree fall down into the head of the last Iberian ibex from this subspecies, and of course got extinct. So from 2000, we don't have animals of this subspecies. Of course, the normal thing, we have say, okay, we have Iberian ibex in Spain, so we just take animals from Spain. This is an Iberian species, and we reintroduce them back into the Pyrenees. But many people from conservation and science said, no, no, no. We only can release animals from the Pyrenees. You say, yeah, but sorry, they're extinct. They're no more. Well, don't worry, we're going to clonate them. And then there was a project, an amazing project to try to clonate the last animal to get individuals from this subspecies. But if you are more logical and to try to relax about all these genetic things, you could say, well, 1,000 years ago, in the year 1022, I bet whatever that those Iberian ibex that is a goat, that they live everywhere, they were widespread in all the habitats of Spain and Portugal, in all the Iberian Peninsula. So there were no genetic difference. Probably they were the same. So what you find is the picture, as I said before, we start to study and we find the picture of the deplete nature, of the deplete Europe, a Europe that is empty. And then we make our own conclusions, but let's be more relaxed. And someone finally, in the French part of the Pyrenees, they were relaxed about it, and they were finally in the ministry in Spain. They understood what was going on, and they gave permits to translocate these ibex from Spain to France. And they were introduced in the French side. There's a nice population. I don't know how many, but there are already hundreds of animals, and they are doing very well. And end of the story, we will have ibex back in the Pyrenees. They are not the ones that were living there, but they're ibex, and they're fulfilling perfectly well their ecological role. And I think that's very important. And that's on all one. And now there's a new one, because I just learned from you guys that are working in Valencia, and this is a bit the same. So there's a reintroduction project for the osprey in the Valencia area. And of course, you bring animals from the places where there are more animals, which is from Northern Europe. And then someone said, yeah, but be careful, because the population in the small population that still lives in the Balearic Islands and Valencia is different. And again, you say, yeah, of course it's different. It's different because we've been shooting ospreys for the last centuries, and there are only small pockets of populations. It's normal that they are different. But I can remind you that osprey is one of the few cosmopolitan species. Osprey lives in all the continents except Antarctica. So again, it would have been very strange 1,000 years ago that there were a few ospreys in the Balearic Islands that they never mixed with the others. Why? That would be very strange. So again, I understand the reason. I see the genetic data, which, by the way, there have been other scientific articles saying that this is not true, there's not really difference. But in any case, this is a scientific debate. But for me, what is important is the ecological role. We need ospreys. And as soon as we have ospreys all around Europe, much better. And in fact, this is already happening. There was this reintroduction project in southern Spain that is doing very well. There are more than 30 pairs. They're already connecting with the Moroccan populations and with the Balearic populations. And if you ask me, what I want is to see ospreys from Khadir to Bardo in Norway. That's the normal thing to have. So Europeans, come on. We want more animals, and we have more abundance and more diversity.
You continue. I want to ask Astrid, because this genetic thing, everybody who works in the world, they know these arguments, they happen a lot. There's a very interesting case with Iberian lynx, because what happened was kind of a surprise. I mean, lots of tension about Iberian lynx, the early 2000s, and there was genetic studies saying that there were differences between the population. There were two populations. It doesn't matter the name for the people who are not from Spain, okay, Doñana and Sierra Morena. There were differences in pattern. But the surprise is that the experts decide, yeah, okay, they are different, so we're going to mix them. So let's not keep them separated. I mean, this is an artifact of history. There are clear differences, and that was, nobody could argue that. But they decided to, so instead of saying, no, we're going to keep them different, we're going to mix them. How did that happen? Do you remember? Do you know that, or maybe because that was kind of a surprise. Because it would have been totally normal that they would decided, no, we are going to keep them separated because the Sierra Morena variety is very different from the Doñana one. How could that happen?
Well, it was obvious that they were different because they have been isolated. So it was an opportunity to mix genes and bring genetic diversity to the whole system. And I think why it happened, because the geneticist in the Iberian Links project, José Antonio Godoy, is a visionary. He's really good, really a beautiful person too. And it was obvious what we need is to diversify. The more isolated these populations are, the more risks for inbreeding and inbreeding depression, which is much worse than just inbreeding. So it was a very clear effort to really diversify the population.
Sometimes the personality of the genetist can have a huge influence on the whole process.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. That's something to know. Okay. So, thank you.
And of course, there were other arguments, but I'm not going to go through them. But of course, sometimes they say, no, but when you have money to reintroduce any species, they say, no, but there's another one that is much more threatened. So there's always a dragonfly somewhere there that is much more threatened, and you need to put the money into the dragonfly. And this is another argument that I'm not going to comment, but there were different arguments that are always recurrent. And it's a pity, because sometimes they are blocking the efforts to bring back wildlife. In any case, enough of things against.
Now we go to challenges.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges,
now challenges.
do you usually have you found in your experience? Yeah.
Well, in my experience, one of the challenges...
Besides the arguments, which you already said.
No. I think that the one challenge, as I explained, one challenge in Europe, I think this is very specific of Europe, is bureaucracy. So it's really difficult to put things through. And you start a reintroduction project and you need years to get authorizations. And of course, so you do the feasibility study, which is normal, but then you need the permits and you need the sources. So bureaucracy, I think, in Europe is one of the blockers. And we need to remove some barriers. Otherwise, so if we are thinking someday to have something similar in terms of translocations like they're doing in Africa, or we will remove these kind of bureaucratic barriers, or we'll never do that. That's for sure. And then, of course, I think one of the challenges is to be sure that we always go right from the beginning with the local communities, because this is super important. In Europe, it can be land abandonment, but there's always people living there, local people, and we are trying to create a new economy, which is nature-based economy. In many of those areas, there's nothing else to do. The traditional farming is not working. European Union has been pumping billions of euros for the last 35 years on the mountain areas, for example, to keep kind of farming or livestock alive, and it doesn't work. So the alternative, of course, at least for rewilding Europe, is rewilding, is to have a new economy that is based on the natural values and the excitement of these new landscapes that are now the Yellowstone of Europe or the Amazons of Europe. So this is something that we need to work, and this is a challenge, because we need to work with very well with local communities, and sometimes it's hard, sometimes they don't understand, sometimes they have so many problems. So if you are raising sheep, your main problem is a structural problem of the price. They are paying you the same price that 30 years ago, but you cannot do anything about it. So who are you blaming for your problems? You're blaming the wolf, because you cannot blame Mercadona, for the Spanish people they understand. So that's the things that are a challenge, and to work in this environment that's difficult. I think those are maybe two of the main challenges. But of course, there are also opportunities. And opportunities, I think one big opportunity is that I think more and more the Europeans want to see more wildlife in their continent. You could say, yeah, those are the urban people, but yeah, urban people is more and more of the continent. So, and very, very soon, a big majority of us, we are going to be living in the cities. We are already living in the cities. So that all these people think that our areas, our protected areas, need to have much more wildlife, that now they're empty. That is very good. So I think this is changing, the perceptions are changing, and in some of those rural regions where they're starting to earn money with water watching, or deer watching, or bison watching, this is also changing the perception. And I think, probably now I'm maybe too optimistic, but I see a lot of regions in Europe where we are working, Eastern Europe, for example, a lot, where the perceptions are changing. So I think this is a very good opportunity. And the other opportunity, and now you're going to say, no way, is money. And you say, no, there's no money. We're always struggling to get our projects done. I think there's more and more money. I think there's this vision that we need to work really against climate change, and there are so many things going on, the biodiversity crisis, and there's money out there. Maybe not within the governments. It's maybe, I think maybe more in the philanthropy, private donors, companies. Many companies, they really want to help on this. So they're ready to put money on this if it's going to be sound and feasible and positive. They're ready to put money. So I think the money is out there, and I want to announce something that I can, there will be an official launch, but I think I can announce it here. We have managed in Rewilding Europe to put together something that is going to be called the European Wildlife Comeback Fund, and we're going to start with between 1 and 2 million euros, and this is going to be to support reintroductions in Europe. And of course, there would be some criteria, but the idea is that as soon as you are ready, we will have a bag of money to pay translocations and reintroductions, because we need to scale up this. We don't have time. We need to put all these animals back into our ecosystems, because of course, also now we know, in the 90s, we were thinking, those animals are nice, no, flagship species. Then we start to think, yeah, those are keystone species, it's very important. But now we also know that wildlife is helping to carbon storage. So the places with the habitats is not enough to protect 30% of the planet for 2030. Is also very important to fill it with wildlife, because those habitats, they are storing more carbon. We have lots of examples, you know many of them, so we're not going to go through these, but our highest priority as a humanity is to store carbon. 100 years ago was to produce food, now is to store carbon. So let's use all these possibilities that the wildlife are giving us to store more carbon. So we need really to reintroduce that. So as I think in something like in September, we will launch this facility, this fund, and I hope that we can help to many of the reintroduction projects in Europe on the basis of first arrive, first serve. So let's do the homework, get the authorizations, get the permits, speak with your authorities, convince everyone in the local communities, and then let's go for it. Vamos.
Go for recommendations?
Yeah, okay. that would be my final slide. More the recommendations. I think this is where we have to go, no? So you see, those are 4 landscapes or 4 rewilding areas in rewilding landscapes in Europe. And this is the kind of our vision, a vision where wildlife is much more present. We still have an empty Europe, and of course wildlife is coming back to many places, but still it's really, we really have an empty Europe, so we have to fill it with wildlife. And I think my recommendation would be take advantage of all these new possibilities that are getting ready, in terms of money, in terms of the new vision, in terms of the importance of carbon storage, as I said. I'm very excited because I think the young generations, they're going to have a hard time doing all the job that is needed. A lot of work is needed to restore our ecosystems, and it needs to happen. Think only about how many land, how much, the amount of land that is going to be free in the moment we start to shift our diet from eating meat into be more vegetarian. There are some calculations. If everyone would turn from meat consumption into vegetarians, or if all the humanity would do that, we will need 75% less land. So this is for 4 billion hectares into 1 billion hectares. So maybe this is not going to happen, but only if half is happening, there will be millions of hectares in Europe that they will be just ready to be restored, to be rewilded, and to be put wildlife, because the main component of this land is going to be to store carbon. And it will be great because we will go there, we will hike there, we will be having a nice time, and we will have fantastic meals there and picnic sites and all these things together. But this is going to be very exciting because we're talking about millions of hectares. So, I mean, especially to the young people, I would say the recommendation would be put on your boots, because you need to do an amazing work ahead, so for the next decades. And it's going to be really challenging, but super interesting. And finally, maybe another recommendation for Europeans, because we will see on the next days, is that let's be fair. Let's be fair with the rest of the world. We have a situation now in Europe where where we complain, like Europeans in many regions, we complain. So in Europe we have, I think the average density of population is 46 inhabitants per square kilometer. With 46 animals, with 46, no, animals, no, more. With 46 inhabitants per square kilometer, we are complaining in many places because we have wolves and we have jackals, and it's impossible to live with those animals because, come on, Europe is very crowded. Well, in India, the average density is 460 inhabitants per square kilometer, and they're supposed to coexist with tigers, with leopards, soon probably with cheetahs. Is that fair? I mean, as Europeans, is that fair? I think we need to do our share. So we need to be able, if we are not able to coexist with wolves or brown bears, don't ask the Africans or the people in India to coexist with these large predators. So I think this is also, my recommendation would be also be relaxed about all these species, because we need to find the ways, and there are ways to coexist.
Thanks a lot, Deli.
Thank you.
So now, Astrid. Okay, let's create the context for Astrid talk. Okay. Okay. I think it was. Let's say it's 2000 or 99. The Iberian lynx. The numbers were horrible. I don't know if there were 200 animals left. There were big fights actually between different groups of how many animals there were. People using camera traps, other people using genetics, and fighting about the number of animals that were left. The European Union and the IUCN, they promoted a meeting about that, and they kind of got the researchers and the managers from Spain and told them, hey guys, get your act together because this is going extinct. But everybody was fighting each other. You had the government of Andalusia, the government of Spain, the researchers, everybody fighting. And it didn't look very good for the lynx. It looked terrible, actually. I mean, anybody that remembers those years. Then something changed. They created a new plan for captive breeding. There were arguments of if captive breeding was necessary or not. Captive breeding started. Astrid was the coordinator of that ex situ conservation program. It took a few years, but then it worked. Before that, they weren't able to breed Iberian lynxes, so it looked like a great technical challenge. But okay, that was solved. More and more lynxes were being bred. The perception changed. They became very popular in magazines. It moved in a few years from a very story of conflict and disaster to kind of success. And then more money came from the European Union, more breeding centers were created, and now I think you are there, the lynx guys, I think the numbers are 2,000 animals in the wild. Okay, so around 2,000 animals in the wild. Mil? Okay, it's my bad. That says in the movies. Yeah. Okay. From being the most endangered cat in the world and being declared critical endangered, now is officially as endangered. They are looking to turn it into vulnerable, which is a different category. So it's been a huge success. So, but it could have been a different story. So the question is, why that happened? I mean, what can we learn from that? Because it could have, the conflict could have stayed, people fighting each other, no captive breeding, no reintroductions. So I think that's the main question, Astrid, in your experience. And I think we have like 20 minutes for that, and maybe it would be good then to ask the Iberian lynx people their opinion. What happened? What were the keys for this success story? So let's see what you think. Okay.
Thank you. No, don't put that yet, please.
Okay.
Well, first, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Because you've done an amazing thing to bring us all together, okay. And I think you're really amazing that way and in many other ways. And I like to think about this like a spaceship for regeneration, powered by our own energy and our own commitment and power. 1,000 years of experience, it's incredible. So what I really feel is a lot of joy in my heart to be here, and I think we all feel that. You can feel the energy of this group, so we have to capitalize on that. Thank you. Thank you, Ignacio. I'm always so happy to see you because you make me laugh, and that's so important, and you always think about celebration.
Because we see each other very seldom, that's why.
Yes, so tomorrow there's going to be a party, and we're going to dance to the restoration of wild species. Anyway, so Iberian lynx, why? So Ignacio asked me, would you like to reflect upon why you think this program has been successful? And it has been successful, but we don't have to relax too much about it because, you know, it's still endangered. It's not critically endangered, it's endangered, and there's a lot to be done. And there's a beautiful vision. So I would start, I think one of the big things that have helped the Iberian lynx is that it's sexy. It has sex appeal. You look at the lynx, it's like the Marilyn Monroe of the Iberian fauna. It's like the sex symbol of the Mediterranean forest. And that symbol is important for the restoration of a whole entire ecosystem. So there are two things going on. One is the lynx itself that needs to be protected and loved, and nobody wants to see something so beautiful to go extinct. And it acts as an umbrella. It's an actual flagship of the Mediterranean forest and maki. And so wherever you put lynxes, you're creating an umbrella to protect everything that lives in that ecosystem. If it were a warted toad, for example, it wouldn't have the pool. So we capitalized on the beauty of the animal to help protect not only the lynx, but the whole range of species that go ahead with the lynx habitat, which is based on a keystone species, that's the rabbit. So sex appeal, I think, has helped the lynx a lot. Second reflection on the lynx, I would say it's the commitment. And the commitment has to do with how beautiful the species it is and how critically endangered it is. And there's been amazing commitment to protect the Iberian lynx. First, from all governments. Europe has been putting money in terms of live nature projects for years and years. It has poured a lot of money into Spain. The Spanish government, the autonomic communities, everybody's really committed to make sure that this animal doesn't go extinct. Why? Well, first, it would be terribly embarrassing, you know, that we would have not since saber-toothed tigers, no cat has gone extinct in the world, and suddenly the Iberian lynx, out of that can't happen. So that's part of the pressure to have that commitment. But also because, you know, we care. It's important not to let something like this go that's so representative of so much biodiversity. There's been the immense commitment of the autonomic communities, and I want to mention Andalusia. Without Andalusia, there wouldn't be lynx. And Andalusia really, really bet hard for the Iberian lynx when it was really hitting rock bottom. The commitment of NGOs, for sure, there's many here, CBD-Habitat working with landowners, WWF forever and ever working on the lynx, Ecologistas en Acción. So commitment at very many levels. At the private sector, the commitment of the landowners is like chapeau. I mean, these people will do whatever to have lynx in their land. They put personal money. They are also helped by these live nature projects, but they are fully, fully committed. And when you go to one of these fincas and are with the landowners, you just feel love for them. I mean, they're doing so much for all of Spain. And then the amazing commitment of the people that work with the Iberian lynx. You just can't believe that there's no hours with the lynx. And things go wrong, and they will always go wrong, and they go wrong on weekends at 3 in the morning. And there you have to be there, breeding program, in situ program. Everybody is so devoted. And some of them for very, very little money. So commitment to save the species, I think it's another big, big factor of the success that we're having right now. I've also reflected on another one, which is habitat. And this is the biggest challenge for the Iberian lynx, but at the same time, it's an opportunity. And we are actually quite lucky. So what is the biggest hurdle and the most important thing for Iberian lynx conservation is the rabbit, the keystone species. In fact, we're conserving lynx because we really do want to use it to conserve rabbits. And rabbits, for those of you who are not from Spain, Hispania means the land of rabbits. So Spain was full of rabbits at some point, and then the rabbit populations began to come down and down and down. And they were hit by 2 viral diseases, myxomatosis, and later on hemorrhagic pneumonia. And hemorrhagic pneumonia causes huge hittings of rabbit populations. These diseases are density dependent, so you need a certain amount of rabbits in the population for them to withstand epizootic. Now we all know about epizootic and enzootics, no? After we've just gone through, or are going through still. So these diseases can occur as an enzootic, they are present in the population, and suddenly you have an epizootic, it's like a big increase on hemorrhagic pneumonia in the population. If the amount of rabbits are below a threshold, they're going to get really hammered, and it's going to be very hard to bring them back. If you have very good, healthy rabbit populations, like in some places in Spain, you can get hit by pneumonia, and they will get really hit, but they will recover easy. So that's a very important thing for Iberian lynx conservation, is the amount of rabbits, and to put our efforts into those areas where there's enough densities of rabbits that they can withstand epidemics. Unfortunately, some areas that used to have rabbits, and they were very important for Iberian lynx conservation, the densities were below the threshold. And right now they are very hard to recover. A lot of money has gone into recovering rabbits. I mean, recovering the Iberian lynx is about recovering rabbits and their habitat, or protecting it. And some classic places where there were good populations of Iberian lynx, like Matas Gordas is an area in Doñana, they just cannot be recovered. There's some of wonderful field biologists here that have been working on lynx for 20 years, and they can tell you much more about how difficult it is to recover rabbits when you are below the threshold. So anyways, habitat is key, is very important, and the incredible thing is that there's still a lot of habitat out there, like you were saying, and we have to really capitalize on that. We don't have to be purists about, oh, we'll only put lynx if you have 10,000 hectares of pristine Mediterranean forest with this amount of rabbits per hectare. It's like, no, let's be brave, and they put them in different places in Spain where you have good rabbit populations, because the lynx will make it there. And another point is luck. We've been incredibly lucky so far. So let's keep our fingers crossed. And I'm saying this because the Iberian lynx can live in places where rabbits have diseases, and they can eat diseased rabbits without dying, and that's lucky. Because, for example, the black-footed ferret, the keystone species is the prairie dogs. We'll talk about them later. If a ferret eats a disease, a plagued prairie dog, it will die. So imagine that we put lynx out there, and suddenly hemorrhagic pneumonia hits, and not only kills the prey, but kills the Iberian lynx, will be in very, very dire straits. So luck has been another factor for success of the Iberian lynx. Another one is that we have a reliable source of animals, and they are animals of good quality. So the breeding program produces between around 40 cubs for release every year, and they are good quality animals. You know, usually captive bred animals don't have as good a chances of survival as wild-born ones, but the survival rate of these captive animals is higher than we ever expected. It's about 60–65%. Tony was saying he debriefed me the other day, and Ramon and many of you have given me little tips about what's going on with the Iberian lynx. And this survival rate is amazing for our captive bred carnivore and has helped a lot. There's populations like the one in Extremadura or Portugal that are fully established by captive bred animals. And there's about 200, I think, in Extremadura. Maria Jesus was telling me yesterday. There's at least more than 100 animals in each one of the populations. So, of course, translocation of wild animals is very important too, and they are likely to have better chances of survival. That's in general in the literature is like that. But you have a high quality and reliable source to really expand the links all over the Iberian Peninsula. So it's the red del trapecista, we say in Spanish, is the safety net that will allow us to really go beyond our original thinking. And also another thing about the source, I was mentioning José Antonio Godoy, which is the geneticist of the program, and now we have a beautiful genetic diversity in the program. It's been really, really well managed, and that also is a source of very high quality animals, actually. So anyways, it's been really well managed. And so this brings me to the last, I'm sure there's many more causes of success, but I think there's been very good vision. Okay, so the links, you know, like you said, 20 years ago, there's about less than 100. Now there's last census in 2020 says they were 11,111. No one more, no one less. 11, exactly. So give and take, a lot of links. Maybe now there may be 1,300 or even more, because that was 2 years ago, and they reproduce really well. The high reproductive success. They have, you know, between 2 and 4 links per litter, so they can grow really, really fast, the populations. So the vision is like, okay, we had a critically endangered species. In the year 2015, we downlisted it to critical. So now we have endangered. So now we have an endangered species. Yay! It's not critically anymore. So next steps, according to recovery plan, would be to downlist it to vulnerable. For that, you need 250 breeding females distributed among several meta-populations, and to maintain those 250 females for 5 years. Okay, we will reach that kind of soon, maybe, you know, relatively soon. But the vision is better. It's like, how do we turn the Iberian lynx into a favorable species under the EU Habitats Directive? And that's vision, because Spain is big. There's places where we can put lynx, where there are good rabbit populations, and then we can use them as a really umbrella, as a real flagship for the biodiversity of the Mediterranean forest. And I think that's a beautiful objective, a beautiful horizon to go with the lynx. We're going to go beyond. We're not going to just stay. It's like, okay, it's vulnerable now, we've done our job. No, we're going to make it a really flagship umbrella for the conservation of our wonderful Mediterranean forest, which is an amazingly beautiful landscape that we have. So, and that we need to protect, and something with that sex appeal helps tremendously. So I think we need support. You know, we can't like, oh, get too relaxed. It's like, this is going great. Things can hit really, really badly, and there's a lot of things acechando en el horizonte. There's a lot of dangers out there. One is, of course, climate change and drought. You know, rabbits need green grass. They need water, you know, and our land is becoming more and more desertified. And we need to be very watchful of this. We need to do, I think, regenerative techniques of how to harvest water, how to include farmers and people. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of wonderful things that need to happening, but we need to be watchful. And at the same time, I think we need to make the Iberian lynx loved by every single person in Spain. And I think for that, an opportunity is to make it the mascot of the Selección Española de Fútbol, of the Spanish football team, you know, but for when we go to, you know, play against it, and then we're the Iberian lynx, and it's really Iberian. And another thing that helps, it really copulates a lot, 20 times in a row. It's truly are representative, and we need to make people feel passion about the links just for its own sake, but also about for what it represents as the jewel of our Mediterranean ecosystems. So more or less that's what I wanted to say. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to both of you. I want to be very strict with time because I think coffee is sacred in the sense of it's the place where you interact, and that's part of our goal. But I have a question for the Iberian Links people. I'm looking there and I don't know where they are. Some of them are there. And whoever volunteers, I think the question is, I mean, the challenge was huge. I'm not talking about the captive breeding or even releasing the animals. The population has growth mostly in private land. That is mostly hunting areas. So, I mean, Sierra Morena is mostly that, and even in Extremadura and Castilla-La Mancha. So, can anybody tell me how were you able to convince landowners who were not particularly lynx lovers or conservationists to live with lynxes and to be probably proud about that from what I hear? Anybody can tell me what was the key? Because I think that's something important to share with other countries. I mean, we're not talking of a super predator, but we're talking of a large predator in hunting areas and in areas where people live out of livestock and all that. So how could you do that? I'm asking government, NGOs, whoever want to give an opinion. But we're going to have for one opinion. You go, okay. There's a volunteer there with a microphone somewhere. Okay. Ahí va. Y si quieres hablar en español, ven en español y traducirán. Ok. ¿Lo han pasado ya entonces? Ahí tenemos a nuestro representante. Muy bien. A la izquierda. Porque es bastante milagroso eso que pasó.
Hola, buenos días. Soy Nuria de la Fundación CBD-Habitat. Como Astrid ha explicado, bueno, lo ha hecho fenomenal. Llevamos más de 20 años trabajando con el lince ibérico y relacionado con tu pregunta, evidentemente el trabajo con los actores principales que ha sido en el territorio ha sido esencial para que la gente viera a esta especie, aparte de sexy, como no un peligro para el entorno.
Un momento,
tras el trabajo...
I'm going to translate it later, okay? Because the people who are English speaking, they don't have translate. So I will make a summary, okay? Para que hables tranquila y luego a lo mejor yo te paro en algún momento y traduzco, ¿vale, Nuria?
¿Sigo o van a traducir?
Empieza. Continúa.
Bueno, lo primero que hicimos y que fue esencial fue trabajar con los actores en el territorio. Fue establecer los primeros acuerdos de colaboración que hicimos junto con WWF. Empezamos en Toledo y fue trabajar con la propiedad privada, que era donde quedaban los últimos ejemplares de los que estábamos hablando. Empezamos en la Sierra de Andújar y ha sido esencial el trabajo con ellos mano a mano y colaborando conjuntamente. Evidentemente, estas fincas privadas donde quedaban estos últimos linces eran fincas de caza mayor. Trabajando con ellos, al principio evidentemente tenían miedo porque podía ser que las administraciones pusieran problemas al detectar que había una especie en peligro en su territorio, pero luego con el trabajo diario y se ha demostrado que no ha sido así. Al revés, ahora mismo se sienten orgullosos de tener esa especie y seguimos trabajando conjuntamente.
Traduzco. Entonces, okay, a summary for the people that don't have the earphones. The thing is that the key thing was to start working with the landowners in the area of, you said Toledo and then Sierra Morena, and to work with, I mean, these are people who manage mostly hunting properties, hunting concessions, mostly for trophy hunting. So they were quite reluctant about, of course, collaborating with conservationists, and quite reluctant, and that's something important in Spain, with getting the government telling you what to do, okay? Because they perceive that behind the NGO there's always the government. So the idea was to collaborate with them and to explain them that this wouldn't affect them, and that was key. Nuria, creo que sería bueno explicar qué es lo que le ofrecíais. O sea, porque una cosa es colaborar y otra cosa, colaborar es muy bonito, pero, o sea, ¿qué se les ofrecía y cómo se les tranquilizaba? O sea, ¿en qué consistía concretamente la colaboración?
Bueno, al principio cuando comenzamos, evidentemente era un intercambio también de experiencia, porque el lince existía en su territorio. Nosotros como conservacionistas, evidentemente veíamos esa falta de conejo, que era la especie clave, había que trabajar en el hábitat, entonces empezamos con proyectos live y empezamos a demostrar cómo manejando el hábitat también y fomentando el conejo era bueno tanto para ellos como para la especie.
Okay.
Y de esa manera era un intercambio mutuo de experiencia.
So kind of something critical was because they were hunting areas, to work with them to increase their rabbit populations. So they will see that the NGOs or the government were investing in increasing the rabbit populations, which will benefit the landowner because they wanted more rabbits, and the lynx. And that was kind of part of the key.
No sé si Ramón quieres apoyar.
Fantástico. Muy bien. Okay, so with this we leave Europe. In 20 minutes we'll travel to the United States. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Sí, esto sí. One thing I think also is to make it profitable for ranchers. No, the profitability is a huge factor, and this is not what's happening in the States. It's not profitable for farmers to have prairie dogs, but here it's profitable for landowners to have lynx.
Okay, so that was a trick to connect with the United States later.
Yes.
Very well done. Excellent. Okay. Vamos a por un café y a charlar. Gracias.